The Shadow Walkers held their positions, dark statues against the rising sun, as Shingai walked away from the ruined pool of silent echoes. His declaration, "I choose the abyss," was not merely defiance. It was an acceptance of the prophecy that demanded sorrow as fuel. The newly stabilized ki in his Dancian felt dense and heavy, like liquid metal. It was power, certainly, but it tasted of ash. He knew every step he took was monitored. The Shadow Walkers would not risk confrontation again until they could guarantee victory, or until he collapsed. He pressed eastward, leaving the sunken lands for a region known only in ancient maps, the wastelands of the broken compass. This area was defined by its spiritual contamination, a psychic residue left over from a colossal forgotten war. The air here was thick and confusing, playing tricks on the spiritual senses, distorting sound and light. It was a place where direction dissolved. This chaos provided concealment, but it came at a terrible cost to the mind. The psychological interference was immediate and profound. As he entered the wastelands, the faint internal hum of the Star Eater blade grew louder, shifting from a low drone to a clear, sorrowful melody. The blade's consciousness, revealed in the library texts, began to communicate directly with his exhausted mind. It was a communication of pure despair. "Why fight, little god?" The blade seemed to whisper without sound. "The shadowed abyss is the only truth. Rest now, yield to the final grief." Shingai clenched his jaw, fighting the invasive thought. He drew strength not from hope, but from the cold duty to his extinct lineage. He used the celestial map. The diagrams were the only trustworthy compass in this mentally treacherous terrain. The slate showed that the chaotic energy of the wastelands was the result of a key feedback loop, a self-sustaining maelstrom. He realized this feedback loop was what prevented even the Shadow Walkers from moving swiftly. It masked their presence, but it also slowed their pursuit. He was navigating by intuition and the internal map, pushing through landscapes that seemed to bend and shift before his eyes. He encountered the skeletal remains of what had been a prosperous farming village centuries ago. The structures were not destroyed by time, but by a sudden, catastrophic display of martial power. The stone walls were vitrified and melted. He recognized the signature instantly. This was the work of the Imperial Flame Order, a military sect often used by the Celestial Court to sanitize difficult territory. This was proof. The court was not just hunting him. They were systematically eliminating any potential allies or resources in his projected path. Shingai felt a surge of cold fury. This was the Central Realm's ruthlessness, destroying the innocent to ensure the capture of the guilty. He noticed a single, small, petrified hand reaching out from under a collapsed timber, the hand of a child. The sight broke through his carefully constructed barrier of weary acceptance. His fists shook with impotent rage. The Star Eater's whisper intensified, taking advantage of his emotional breach. "Sorrow, use the sorrow, burn them all. The power is waiting." Shingai resisted the urge to draw the blade and lash out at the unseen assassins shadowing his movements. He knew the blade sought this emotional instability. The prophecy was being fulfilled not by external forces, but by his own deepening internal wounds. He forced himself to move on, turning the raw anger into focused, icy determination. He must be faster. The second nexus point, the Mountain of Shifting Winds, was only 2 days away by his fastest, most perilous route. To reach it, he had to cross the Canyon of Whispering Shadows, a winding chasm that amplified the Shadow Walker's concealment techniques. The canyon was notorious for its treacherous footing and the unpredictable gusts of spiritual wind that could rip an unprepared body from the ledges. As he entered the canyon, the light dimmed instantly, filtered by the massive, overhanging stone cliffs. He had to rely on a new ability, subtly enhanced by his recovery at the Pool of Silent Echoes: resonant sight. This technique allowed him to sense the residual spiritual vibrations left by any living thing, even those in profound concealment. He focused his sight. Stone walls around him pulsed with the faint, fading echoes of ancient travelers and mineral deposits. Then he saw them. 3 distinct, cold, non-human resonances, moving parallel to him, high above on the rim of the canyon. The Shadow Walkers were using the cliff face as a cover, moving effortlessly through the air, perfectly silent. He could not fight them here. The vertical terrain and his need to conserve energy made an engagement fatal. He quickened his pace, becoming a dark blur against the gray rock, relying on minute spiritual pulses to propel his leaps. Suddenly, a small dark projectile hissed past his ear, embedding itself deep into the stone where his head had been. It was a poisoned needle, a weapon of the Shadow Walkers. They had broken their silence, attempting a non-lethal, incapacitating strike. Shingai halted instantly, pressing flat against the cliff face, heart pounding against his ribs. The Shadow Walkers were testing him, checking his reaction speed and his reserve power. He used the Void Step, not to move, but to briefly flicker his spiritual signature, creating a chaotic echo effect. The distraction worked. A second needle embedded harmlessly into the empty space where his echo had been. This confirmation gave him the slight advantage he needed. He knew their timing was based on tracking his resonance. He resumed his flight, but now he was deliberately modulating his ki, creating 3 false, staggered resonances behind him. The Shadow Walkers would be forced to split their attention between 3 potential targets. Slowing their concentrated attack, he leaped across a 50-foot gap, landing lightly on a precarious jut of rock. The wind screamed through the chasm below. He had been running for 24 hours straight since leaving the pool, fueled only by medicinal pellets and raw desperation. The Star Eater's voice was now a constant, droning choir of lamentation in his mind, whispering doubt into every thought. Look at the price of your survival, the children, the shattered clans. All for this hopeless, sorrowful dance. He pushed back against the mental assault, constructing a mental shield of cold, geometric clarity, the diagrams from the slate map. The geometry of the cosmos was pure, devoid of emotion, and served as a temporary anchor against the blade's despair. He saw the end of the canyon ahead, where the walls broke into a vast rolling plain, leading up to the mountain of shifting winds. He burst from the canyon's mouth, sprinting across the open plain. The Shadow Walkers would be forced to follow, losing the cover of the shadows. As he ran, the Star Reader's blade began to vibrate, resonating with a deep internal hunger. He glanced over his shoulder. He saw them for the first time clearly, 3 figures cloaked in black, moving across the sun-drenched plain as if they were still submerged in deep twilight. They moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance far faster than he had anticipated. His resonance trick had only provided a momentary delay. He realized his flight was futile. He needed to reach the nexus point and draw its power before they caught him. The mountain of shifting winds loomed ahead, a colossal, jagged peak perpetually shrouded in fast-moving cloud banks. The clouds were not water vapor, they were solidified spiritual energy. The second convergence point's defensive layer. The Star Eater demanded sorrow. The prophecy pointed toward the abyss. Shingai knew he had to accept the next dose of power, regardless of the cost. He started the ascent, the sheer face of the mountain testing his every sinew and spiritual reserve. The very rock of the mountain seemed to fight back, emitting unpredictable bursts of wind that sought to dislodge him. He focused his ki into his fingertips, adhering to the rock face, moving upward with the slow, painful precision of a spider. Behind him, the Shadow Walkers began their climb, moving with an eerie, gravity-defying grace that mocked his struggle. One of them, the Alpha, was carrying a heavy, circular device, a ki dampening array. The Alpha began to set the array near the base of the mountain, activating its field. Shingai felt the effect immediately. The spiritual energy in the air, already chaotic, now felt thick and resistant, like swimming through heavy oil. The array was designed to prevent any high-level cultivation techniques or escapes, trapping him on the mountain. He now understood their plan. They would not chase. They would simply corner him at the nexus point, draining his resources until he failed. The prophecy suddenly felt crushingly real. The God-Shatterer must not rest until the wandering path intersects with the shadowed abyss. The abyss was the fate they created. He climbed higher, forcing his body to ignore the exhaustion, the pain, and the cold metallic pressure of the ki dampening array. He entered the layer of spiritual clouds. The light inside was blindingly white, yet the air was heavy with unspoken threats. The clouds were a chaotic, shifting spiritual storm. They tore at his protective ki shield, forcing him to spend energy constantly. The slate map diagrams were clear now. The mountain of shifting winds was not just a pool, it was a spiritual turbine. It drew celestial ki down and spun it into raw, refined power, a process violent and incredibly difficult to harness. The convergence point was at the very summit, in the eye of the spiritual storm. He reached a small, ice-covered ledge, allowing himself a moment of respite. He had to prepare his mind for the terrifying intake of power. The Star Eater's internal cry of despair reached a fever pitch. "Let it end here, Shingai. Let the sorrow consume you in the blade. It is your only release." The blade was almost unbearable, attempting to merge its despair with his fear of failure. Shingai forced himself to face the blade's truth. He would be consumed by sorrow. He would reach a tragic end. But it would be on his own terms, would not give the celestial court the satisfaction of his internal collapse. He pulled the Star Eater from its sheath, not to fight the Shadow Walkers, but to stare into its reflective black surface. He held the blade vertically, using it as a focusing tool, aligning its desperate energy with the chaotic spiritual turbine above him. He began the alignment process, drawing the swirling spiritual energy of the mountain directly through the starter and into his Dancian. The power transfer was cataclysmic. His body arched violently, his meridians screaming under the impossible influx of pure ki. He was no longer a boy. He was a conduit for a celestial storm, a vessel struggling to contain the uncontainable. The Star Eater screamed internally, feeding on the pain, the fear, and the profound loneliness of the moment. His body glowed with a terrifying, unsteady white light, visible even through the spiritual clouds. The Shadow Walkers, seeing the immense energy eruption, paused their ascent. They knew this was the critical moment. If he failed, the explosion would wipe the top off the mountain of shifting winds. If he succeeded, he would be virtually untouchable. The pain finally subsided, replaced by a cold, frightening clarity. He had mastered the spiritual turbine, but the Star Eater had taken its payment. He felt a deep, new layer of sorrow settled permanently in his soul. His power had increased exponentially, but his heart was heavier than ever. He was now a master of the celestial gale step, a technique for navigating chaotic spiritual environments. He rose, the white light fading, replaced by the black silence of his legacy. He knew what he had to do next. The next nexus point was the River of Silent Tears. The destiny of the wandering god demanded more sorrow. Shingai has survived the Shadow Walker's trap and gained the terrifying celestial gale step, but at the cost of his inner peace. His journey to the tragic climax continues. Comment below and tell us what you think the River of Silent Tears will demand from Shingai. I like this video script. Share it with fellow Wuxia fans, and subscribe to Storycraft Studio for Part 4.